So why is a philosophy professor writing a book on economics? The connection actually has to do with fallacies. The book is organized as a set of 12 chapters, each of which is dedicated to a particular economic fallacy. And it's actually because of fallacies that I got interested in. That's why a philosopher is interested. I mean, one of the attractions of philosophy, one of the ways you get hooked on it as an undergraduate typically, is that you have all these sort of naive views about things, and you go to your philosophy class and you discover that there is no external world, you could be dreaming, and that moral judgments are nothing but your emotional reaction, and so forth. In other words, the Socratic wisdom is coming to know that you do not know, coming to realize that all of the naive beliefs that you were raised with actually turn out to be way more complicated when you look at them carefully. And I was always intrigued by that. I mean, I really think it's interesting when common sense turns out to be mistaken. And in that respect, economics is a very philosophical discipline. Why? Because economics is an area where fallacies are thick on the ground. That is, it is incredibly easy to make mistakes when thinking about economics. And I'm not talking about banks, right? I'm talking about average people trying to understand how the economy works. It's incredibly easy to engage in fallacious patterns of reasoning, right? Or to say things that simply do not make any sense. So, economics is an area which is tricky. There are a lot of fallacies. And therefore, the average level of economic literacy in the population amongst people who haven't sort of committed themselves to studying it. And there are some unnecessary barriers to understanding economics, there's no question. Many of them put up by the economics profession. It's just a general, in particular, but so for example, let me digress then. So for example, one of my proudest achievements in the book is that there are no, for those of you who've ever had a summer reading economics class, there are no supply and demand curves in the entire book. Thank you. Because I find them unintuitive. So when you do intro economics, which is all the economics I ever did, guy gets up there, mumbles a few things, and then puts a supply and demand curve on the board, right? And for many economists, I do get the sense that for them, that's elusively clear. Like, as soon as they see the demand curve, they're like, aha, that's what's going on. Whereas every time I see a demand curve, I think, why is it going down again? So I find them confusing. So one of the things I've actually been working on for years in philosophy is sort of how to teach basic economics without using a single supply and demand curve. And the fruits of my labor are there. But I'm very interested in fallacies, and economics is an area where I interact with lots of colleagues, highly educated people who are in the humanities. I interact with a lot of people who have a lot of big opinions about capitalism, both students and colleagues, who don't understand elementary features of how a market economy works. And they say things that make no sense at all, because there are economic fallacies which they're committing, which they're simply not aware of. So I have a kind of intellectual interest in it, but it's also of political relevance, and particularly when the economy is purring along smoothly, the fact that people are economically illiterate is not such a problem. But I think when you start to encounter economic difficulties, and particularly have a full-scale economic crisis, I think it kind of reminds us all that we probably should know, as citizens, we should probably have a bit of a better understanding of how our economy functions. Like, for example, why are banks different than automakers? Something that gets clearly explained. They say, banks have systemic importance, automakers don't. Well, why is that exactly? There is actually a good answer. There's a good reason why you have to save banks, no matter how badly they behaved, whereas you don't have to save automakers. There's a good reason for that, but it's something that most people are unaware of. So let me just say, I just want to pick out one thread, which is one of the things that's trickiest about thinking about the economy is a very, very simple principle, which is that a market economy is a system of exchange. And what that means, amongst other things, is that with every exchange, there's always two sides to the transaction. So for every person who sells something, there has to be somebody who buys something. And that sounds so totally obvious when you say it, but that has systemic implications in terms of the way you think about things that are very easy to ignore. So for example, a lot of people who probably not that many people in this room, but who buy and sell stocks and day trade and so forth. I have a brother-in-law who likes to day trade, and does extra money and day trades, right? And I told him once my investment strategy was to short every single stock he buys. Because he he exactly fits the profile of a man who loses money in the stock market. And so I just felt he was guaranteed to lose money, so I was guaranteed to win money. And even if not, the family would come out even. I don't talk to my brother-in-law that often. Anyway, so okay, so what is it that people forget when buying and selling stocks? Is they forget that every time you're selling a stock, that means that you found somebody willing to buy it. And there's this principle, they say nobody ever buys a stock because they think it's going down. And so the fact that you found a buyer for your stock means that somebody thinks it's going up. Right? So when you go out there trying to sell your stock, and you're sitting around for a couple of days with your little sign saying, please buy my stock, right? And then eventually someone comes along and says, okay, I'll buy your stock. Your immediate response should be, wait a minute. Why are you so interested in buying this stock, right? Like, what do you know that I don't know? In other words, you should actually update your beliefs about whether or not that stock is going down based on the fact that you found a buyer for it, right? But people in general can easily forget. They think, oh, I'm buying it. And that there's this kind of pool out there of just sort of, like I get money for it. It's not that I found another person who wants it, right? But that has to be the case, right? There has to be somebody out there who has exactly the opposite beliefs as you, who thinks it's going up, not going down. Very easy to forget that there's two sides to every transaction. So it's a common error that people commit when trying to make money day trading. You have to have better information. You have to have good reason to think that person's dumber than you. And chances are that person isn't. Anyhow, so that failure to appreciate the fact that there's a buyer and seller in every end of transaction sort of systematically actually generates fallacies in the way we think about things. So you can see exactly the same failure to appreciate the existence of buyer and seller in international trade when people think about international trade. I have a lot of anxieties about international trade, but I don't share the predominant anxiety which the population in general has, which is the idea that we're exporting jobs and that we're somehow going to bankrupt ourselves because Chinese workers, for example, are going to come in and making 10 cents an hour, and they're going to be able to make everything that we make better than us, so therefore we're all going to become unemployed. There's this phrase I picked up from the chairman of General Motors, who said that America's in danger of becoming uncompetitive in everything. Now that's a conceptual impossibility, and the reason it's conceptually impossible is that the Chinese, though they don't just make stuff and give it to us, right? We have to pay them for it. But there's a tendency to think that we're paying for it in money. And there's a fallacy at the heart of that, which actually a lot of sophisticated people who comment on economics commit this fallacy. They encourage it by conceiving of international trade on analogy with doing business with a store. So thinking that buying something from China is like buying something from Walmart. Typically buying something from Walmart is buying something from China. But to think that there's an analogy, and so I actually call this the Lexus and the olive tree fallacy, because Thomas Friedman so relentlessly promoted this fallacious understanding of international trade. The difference is that when you go to Chinese people and you say, oh, I would like to buy your toys, here's some Canadian money in return. What are they going to do with your Canadian money? Right? When you pay for things with Canadian money, it's like giving the Chinese a gift card or a voucher. The only thing that can be done with Canadian money, fundamentally, is buy Canadian goods. Right? So you should think of it as being like paying with a Home Depot gift card or something like that. But I sometimes get these for a while I was doing a lot of construction, so everyone was giving me Home Depot gift cards, and it got to the point where I didn't need anything from Home Depot. So once I was wandering around Home Depot with a $100 gift card, thinking, table saw, crown molding in the living room. I'm like, what can I buy here for $100, right? Well, every time we import goods from China and we pay with Canadian dollars, you should imagine a bunch of Chinese people wandering around the country saying, maple syrup, 2x4s, there's got to be something here we want, And if there isn't, okay, we'll park it in government debt, but eventually, the point is that money has to be cashed in for Canadian goods. And they can sell it to somebody else, but then that person cashes it in for Canadian goods, right? Because fundamentally, goods are exchanged for goods. Money mediates that transaction, right? But you cannot just become an importer. You have to export. That's how you pay for stuff. And the only reason Chinese people sell us stuff is because ultimately they want Canadian goods. So trade, of course, reallocates work within Canada But if I get laid off because something's being imported from China, we pay with a gift certificate for Canadian goods somewhere else in the economy. Right? Now, that's a very, very fundamental principle in international trade that gets ignored.